My name is Jonas Reed, and at 29, I thought I had mastered invisibility. I worked 2 jobs, paid my bills on time, and never demanded anything from anyone, least of all my own family. Mom, Caroline, 56, loved to brag she'd raised a self-reliant son, which really meant I handled problems alone and never cluttered her schedule. Dad, Gerald, 58, preferred his workshop to conversation, so silence became our home language. Growing up, the spotlight belonged to my brother Mason, 32 quarterback economics degree, flawless grin. Mason's arrival sucked the air from every room. Mom's laugh grew brighter. Dad's voice deeper, relatives swarmed. I learned early that when you make yourself useful, people stop seeing you as human and start seeing you as furniture. The habit followed me into adulthood. When Dad's heart murmurs forced him to cut hours at the machine shop, the mortgage didn't shrink. I stepped in just until they caught up, I told myself. 3 months turned into 3 years of direct deposits, no questions asked. Mom never thanked me. Dad never asked how rent in my studio kept rising while their lights stayed on. Mason, of course, contributed stories. Instead of money, business-class flights to Berlin, selfies from yachts he didn't own. Mom reposted every photo with the caption, "Proud of my miracle." I pressed like from my cubicle and went back to auditing spreadsheets. Thanksgiving arrived like a rerun, nobody bothered to cancel. I drove 90 minutes south to the family home in Briarwood, playlist looping soft indie tracks that wouldn't distract me from lurking dread. The house looked the same, peeling shutters, cracked driveway, except for Mason's leased sports car gleaming at the curb. Mom greeted me with a checklist instead of a hug, sweet potatoes ovens on 375. Don't let them burn, Jonas. Good to see you too, Ma. She'd already turned away. In the kitchen, I mashed, stirred, and timed, while Mom fussed over Mason's girlfriend, Eden, maybe 23, maybe ceramic, who squealed at the word truffle. Dad poured whiskey, nodded at Mason's market anecdotes, ignored the steam fogging my glasses. Dinner began with Mason carving the turkey as if it were a TED Talk. Each slice came with a tale when I closed that Series A. The board begged me to stay. Berlin's fintech scene is wild. Eden's laughter clinked like glass ornaments. I chewed quietly, counting my heartbeat to stay calm. Halfway through pie, Mom turned to me. Must be nice having no kids, no mortgage, just rent and video games. I blinked. The rent fairy hasn't visited in a while. She tilted her head, sweet lethal. Jonas, you act like you're doing us some huge favor. Honestly, you've been a weight on this family since middle school. Silence swallowed the room. Eden's fork hovered midair. Dad stared at his drink. Mason chuckled low and agreeable. At least Jonas knows spreadsheets. We can't all be visionaries. Something inside me locked into place like a door I hadn't noticed was open, finally closing. I set my fork down, wiped my mouth, and stood. No shouting, no tears. I'm heading out, I said. Mom's eyebrow lifted. Drama, really? I answered by sliding my chair back under the table, quiet, measured, final. The drive home felt underwater, soundless, and heavy. My phone buzzed twice, Mom's guilt grenade, no doubt, but I let it flash unanswered. Inside my apartment, I sat on the floor and opened my banking app. 4 automatic payments to my parents were scheduled for December 1st. I tapped cancel on each. No explanation, no warning. Relief came like a breath I'd been holding for a decade. Then I tallied everything: utilities, medical bills, emergency repairs, 43 months of transactions. I created a folder, labeled it Read Household Subsidy, and saved every receipt. Proof that I existed, if only to myself. 2 days later, Dad called. His voice carried the rust of unpracticed conversation. Jonas' mortgage bounced. Any idea why? Asked Mason, I replied, and hung up. The silence stretched 1 week, then 2. On the 15th, a text from Mom lit my screen. We need you to sort this out before it ruins our credit. Don't act childish. Childish! The word tasted sour. I archived the message without response. Rumors trickled through my cousin Riley. Mom claimed I was in a dark place, unstable, possibly addicted to online gambling. Anything to frame my absence as malfunction instead of boundary. Riley didn't buy it, but gossip spreads faster than facts. Christmas invitations never arrived. Photos surfaced on Facebook: Mason in a crimson sweater, Eden holding mistletoe, my parents beaming beneath twinkle lights I'd strung last year. Caption: some bonds can't be broken. I closed the app, heart surprisingly calm. I wasn't part of that scene. I'd only financed the set design. Mid-January, Riley called, voice fizzing with urgency. Your brother quit his firm after an internal review. Word is misuse of client funds. I almost laughed. The golden child's sheen was peeling, and Mom's emergency ATM me was closed. A week later, Mom's tone shifted from accusation to syrup. Sweetheart, can we talk? Dad's blood pressure is up. The bank is threatening delete. Then Mason rang. Voicemail, Jonas, big idea brewing. Need seed money. Family helping family. Right? I saved the recording as evidence. My clarity sharpened. I was never family-only capital. One morning at work, an unknown lender emailed co-application received for a home equity line of credit. Listed borrowers. Jonas Reed and Mason Reed. My signature forged, my bank statements attached. Adrenaline buzzed like electricity, but fear gave way to resolve. I drafted an email to Marisol Vega, an attorney who'd once assisted our company forgery evidence. Mason's voicemail, concise timeline. Her reply came within the hour. I can help. First, freeze your credit. Second, file a police report. Third, decide how public you want this. I spent that night compiling every payment I'd ever made on my parents' behalf, dated and highlighted. I closed joint accounts, updated passwords, enabled two-factor, everything, ordered a credit freeze. For the first time in years, I slept through the night, no clenching jaw, no half-dreams of overdue notices, just quiet. Morning brought a resignation from invisibility, not from my job. The next steps would take time and meticulous care. I wasn't planning revenge, I was planning release. Yet I knew my absence would create a vacuum, and vacuums demand to be filled. Sooner or later, Mom would reach out with a plea disguised as forgiveness. Mason would promise returns he could never deliver. Dad would mutter about family duty. I needed to be ready, not with anger, but with unbreakable boundaries. I closed my laptop, exhaled, and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Space for new plans, new loyalties, maybe even joy. Thanksgiving had been the spark. What came next would be the firebreak, cutting off the old growth so I could finally see the sky. The morning after that quiet promise to myself, I slipped into routine like nothing had happened. But inside, every gesture felt sharper, newly intentional. I crafted an email to my landlord asking month-to-month flexibility, and another to HR inquiring about transfer opportunities, all while sipping coffee that for once did not taste of resentment. Mason kept calling. I let his name flash and fade. Mom alternated between silence and guilt-dipped text. Dad needs his pills, the roof is leaking. Family sticks together, each ignored. Marisol filed the police report, froze my credit, and forwarded an investigator's request for a statement. I wrote one during lunch, every fact precise, no rage between the lines. By February, the bank had flagged the forged loan and notified Mason that they would pursue restitution if the co-applicant me pressed charges. He left a new voicemail, voice pitched low, pleading. Now? Bro, I messed up. We can fix this if you'll just talk to me. I deleted it, then walked to the park, letting winter air scrape the last sympathy from my lungs. A week later, HR confirmed an opening in Portland. I booked a round-trip flight to visit the office, scheduled 2 interviews, and spent the night before departure gathering the thick stack of receipts that proved my parents' bills had been mine. I didn't need them for the trip, but holding those pages made the transition feel tangible, a record of everything I was leaving behind. The Portland office pulsed with energy, unlike the weary cubicles back home. Managers asked for my opinion. Coworkers laughed without calculating status, and the city itself smelled of cedar and rain instead of asphalt cooked under southern sun. On the red-eye home, I drafted a proposal that used data from 3 clients to show how we could cut shipping costs by 18%. By the time we landed, my phone pinged with a reply from the regional director. Let's talk next week. Momentum tasted sweet. Back in Briarwood, the walls of my studio seemed to shrink around the boxes I'd started filling: books, photos, thrift store dishes, each taped shut like a private goodbye. That same night, Riley called, whispering so her kids wouldn't overhear. Mom told everyone at church, "You're having a breakdown, that you forged Mason's name to ruin his credit." I laughed an actual bark that surprised me, thanked her, and sent Marisol another note, defamation angle. She answered in minutes. Truth is the best disinfectant. Let's compile evidence. We built a digital vault, emails from Mom admitting my payments, bank statements showing my deposits. Mason's forged signatures side by side with my real one. Meanwhile, Mason posted selfies from a co-working space captioned, "CEO Life Hustle never sleeps though." Local gossip suggested investors were asking uncomfortable questions. The company that once flaunted him at conferences quietly scrubbed his bio from the website. March brought rain and clarity. HR offered the Portland transfer with a salary bump and relocation stipend. The lease on my studio ended in May, perfect timing. I spent weekends selling furniture online, meeting strangers in parking lots. Each Venmo ping, another ounce of freedom. One Sunday, I drove to the lake cabin. Grandpa had left me a place I hadn't visited since college, and unlocked windows stiff with neglect. I swept spiders from the corner, lit the fireplace, and let silence settle. Out on the dock, I watched water slide under gray clouds, and admitted aloud, I'm allowed to start over. Saying it made it real. Back in town, the storm broke. A detective visited my workplace to ask follow-up questions. Coworkers eyed me curiously, but Marisol had prepped me, and the interview took 10 calm minutes. The next day, Mason was served at our parents' address. Within hours, I received 11 missed calls, texts alternating anger and panic. How could you drag family into court? Please, we'll pay you back. I muted the thread and focused on finishing a quarterly report that would later become the backbone of my promotion. April arrived with dogwood blooms and a certified letter. Mason was officially charged with attempted identity theft and fraud. Arraignment set for June. I expected triumph, but felt only a quiet settling, like furniture placed where it finally belonged. Mom escalated. A handwritten envelope slid under my apartment door, pages streaked with tears. Or maybe faucet water begging me to drop the charges because the stress is killing your father. I scanned it into the vault and shredded the original. On a Thursday afternoon, my manager called me into a small conference room. The executive team wanted me to present the retention model I'd sent months earlier. If implementation numbers held true, we'd save the company over $1 million in Q2. I smiled, thinking of Mom's claim that I never did anything meaningful. Implementation numbers did hold, and by early May, the executives invited me to Portland for orientation, title Senior Strategic Analyst. I accepted, then drove to Briarwood one last time to collect the few things still stored in my parents' attic childhood sketchbooks. Grandpa's fishing rod, a shoebox of ticket stubs. I timed my arrival while they were at work. But Eden, no longer Mason's girlfriend, just a roommate feeding off the dwindling glow, pulled into the driveway as I carried the final box. She looked thin, her eyes hollow. "He's ruined, you know," she whispered, almost resentful that I didn't offer comfort. I wanted to say I was sorry, but the words felt false. She'd laughed at every story that dimmed me. Instead, I nodded, closed my trunk, and drove away. 2 weeks later, my possessions crossed state lines in a moving pod. I followed in my Corolla, passing mountain ranges that felt like barricades against the past. Portland unfolded in green and steel. My new apartment faced a park where dogs chased frisbees and no one knew my history. Workdays blurred with excitement, presentations, brainstorms, lunches where people asked about my ideas instead of my availability for favors. Evenings, I strolled rain-fresh streets, discovering bookstores, tasting food that wasn't budget ramen. I joined a weekend hiking group and a Tuesday pottery class where clay slipped through my fingers like stress leaving the body. Therapy sessions helped dismantle the belief that love must be bought. Each breakthrough felt like resetting a bone that had healed crooked. My side project, an online tool for small businesses to automate local deliveries, launched quietly, and by autumn 12, clients paid monthly subscriptions that covered rent. One night in October, while glazing a lopsided mug, I received an email. The court had accepted Mason's plea deal. 18 months probation, restitution of bank fees, mandatory fraud counseling. I set the half-dry mug on the shelf. Heart steady, and typed, received thank you to Marisol. Weeks slipped into routine. Then, in December, a notice arrived from a Briarwood bank. My parents were 4 months behind on their mortgage. Foreclosure proceedings imminent. Apparently, my previous payments still flagged me as a past contributor, so the automated system reached out. For a moment, I felt the old reflex move, money fix it, but the instinct passed like a gust hitting a closed window. Instead, I saw an opportunity not for revenge, but for closure. Consultation with Marisol confirmed I could purchase the property through a Shell LLC at auction. I hesitated, not wanting to turn spite into a lifestyle, yet the thought of that house built with my money weaponized against me. Transforming into something good sparked a steadier kind of fire. I researched transitional housing programs, read statistics on young adults aging out of foster care, spoke with a nonprofit director who'd cried when I floated the idea of a safe start home. The plan crystallized: acquire the house, refurbish, donate its use under a long-term lease funded by my side business profits. January auction day arrived gray and drizzly. I attended incognito agent bidding on behalf of Willow Star Ventures, LLC, my quiet alter ego. Bidding opened modest rows haltingly, then stalled. Gavel struck at a number I could manage without a loan thanks to savings and stock options from the retention model's success. Deed transfer took 10 business days, during which Riley called to report Mom sobbing about losing the legacy home. I listened, thanked her, said nothing of my plan. When the sheriff served final notice to vacate, I imagined the kitchen where I'd mash sweet potatoes, now echoing with uneaten blame. They vacated 2 days before deadline. Neighbors said a moving van hauled half-broken furniture to an apartment across town. I drove by later unseen and felt only a cool detachment. No glee, just completion. Renovations began, roof repaired. Wiring updated bedrooms, painted soft sunrise colors. Volunteers installed bunk beds, stocked a pantry, planted a vegetable garden. In June, the first residents arrived, 3 19-year-olds with cautious smiles. I handed them keys and a binder of resources, then stepped outside to breathe the summer air. Laughter drifted through an open window, not mocking this time, but genuine. I closed the gate behind me and realized I didn't feel invisible anymore. 2 weeks later, a thin envelope reached my Portland mailbox. Mom's handwriting, shaky one line. We never meant for things to go this far. No apology, no ownership. I slid the letter into a shredder and watched the strips fall like confetti for a party I'd already left. Walking to the park, I pictured future holidays friends from pottery, bringing mismatched mugs. Coworkers sharing potluck dishes. Maybe someone special beside me. Family could be chosen built from respect instead of obligation. As evening settled over fir trees, I understood the true victory wasn't the legal outcome or the renovated house. It was the quiet inside my own head, the absence of that old metallic buzz of inadequacy. I had broken the cycle without breaking myself, and that finally felt like home. Spring slid into a mellow Pacific Northwest summer, the kind where dusk lingers so long, it feels like the sky forgets its bedtime, and I matched that slow, generous light with my own pace working days that hummed instead of screamed, and evenings that smelled of rain on cedar. The transitional house in Briarwood sent monthly updates, photos of raised bed gardens. My new tenants tended snapshots of birthdays celebrated around a scuffed table I'd once scrubbed after Thanksgiving. Each image a quiet rebuttal to the myth that nothing good could grow from that address. In Portland, my delivery automation platform crossed 20 clients, cash flow steady enough to fund an extra counselor position at the house, and I caught myself grinning in elevators for no particular reason. Then August blew in like a reminder that stories rarely end when you think they do. I was pouring coffee before a morning hike when my old phone number kept alive for 2-factor logins buzzed with a voicemail alert. Curiosity nudged me to listen on speaker. Mom's voice, thin and rushed, spilled out, "Jonas, your father collapsed at work. They're transferring him to Ridgeview Medical. We don't have insurance anymore. Please call." My mind flashed to Dad's workshop, the hum of machinery, and the smell of metal shavings. Then to the memory of a man who chose silence whenever words grew inconvenient. I swallowed, sat on the edge of the couch, and weighed the line between compassion and complicity. 30 seconds later, I dialed the hospital, directly bypassing family, and confirmed Dad's status stable, but awaiting tests. Billing had already flagged unpaid premiums. I thanked the nurse, hung up, and stared at the mug cooling in my hand. Therapy had taught me boundaries can include gentleness, they just can't require self-betrayal. So I emailed Marisol. Could the family trust Grandpa left cover emergency care if paid directly to the hospital? She replied within an hour, attaching a form that funneled funds without touching Mom's or Mason's accounts. Paperwork executed. I hiked through mossy trails until sweat and steady breath untangled the knot in my stomach. 3 days later, Dad left the hospital with stents and a follow-up regimen. Mom posted on social media that an anonymous angel had covered expenses. Riley texted a screenshot with a single raised eyebrow emoji. I responded with a shrug emoticon and let the mystery stand. Compassion didn't need credit. September brought company news my retention model had inspired a corporate spin-off, and leadership wanted me to spearhead the new division. The offer came with equity, a staff of 8, and the freedom to work remotely half the week. I accepted after one thoughtful walk along the Willamette River, deciding that expansion no longer felt like running away. It felt like stepping into shoes I'd already grown for. I hired a team that included a veteran coder returning from parental leave and a recent graduate whose resume glowed with untested brilliance. People who, like me, understood what it meant to be underestimated. While I built roadmaps and budgets, Mason's probation progressed less smoothly. He missed 2 counseling sessions, caught a citation for reckless driving, and ranted online about rigged systems. Screenshots landed in my evidence vault just in case. Meanwhile, Mom attempted a different tactic. A glossy greeting card arrived, front adorned with sunflowers, inside a stiff apology that never used the word sorry, instead blaming stress, misinformation, and outsiders who came between us. She capped it with a Bible verse on forgiveness. I slipped the card into a drawer, unresolved disputes printed between cheerful petals, and considered how apologies without accountability are merely invitations to resume old harm. I declined. That week, my side business revenue surpassed my W-2 income for the first time, and I celebrated by buying a second-hand kayak turquoise and scratched perfect. Out on the Columbia River, I paddled until my arms burned water, slapping the hull like applause. Winter crept in with damp mornings that smelled of wood smoke. One evening, after a late meeting, I found an unfamiliar number on my caller ID. Impulse said, "Ignore," but I answered, voice steady. Dad, quieter than I'd ever heard him, exhaled into the line before speaking. I wanted to thank whoever paid the hospital. "Your mother says it was a GoFundMe stranger." "I think I know better." Silence stretched. I pictured his workshop, now empty on doctor's orders, the man himself sitting in a dim kitchen, penny-colored sawdust still clinging to his boots. He resumed, "I can't fix everything that happened, but I needed you to hear it from me. Whatever anger you hold, you earned it." The words were small, imperfect, but they weren't nothing. I told him I hoped he followed the cardiologist's plan, then wished him a good night. After hanging up, I stood by the window watching snow begin to feather the streetlights, marveling at how a few honest words could feel both heavy and light. January again, 1 full year since the foreclosure auction arrived, bearing 2 envelopes. The first, stamped from the county records office, finalized the charitable lease on the Briarwood house for the next decade. The second, handwritten by one of the residents, thanked me for believing someone his own parents had abandoned was worth a fresh start. He enclosed a photo of his acceptance letter to community college. Tears surprised me, quick and warm. The cycle had not just been broken. Something better had sprouted from its shards. Late February, Mason's name lit my screen. Against instinct, I picked up curiosity, tempered by detachment. He sighed, words tumbling without swagger. "Probation might get revoked. I'm out of options, Jonas. I know I burned bridges, but you're still my brother." The statement, naked of charm, hovered. I said I hoped he found the help he needed, suggested he lean on his counselor, and ended the call. Compassion, yes. Enabling, never again. In spring, my division launched its first product, and industry blogs buzzed about the unexpected leader from Portland who'd turned retention algorithms into narrative dashboards executives actually understood. Invitations to speak at conferences filled my inbox. I accepted one in Seattle, told my story without the family drama, focusing instead on data's power to tell truths companies ignore. Afterward, a recruiter from a nonprofit logistics initiative introduced herself. Collaboration possibilities glimmered. Back at the transitional home garden, beds burst with lettuce and early tomatoes. The residents invited me to a Sunday cookout. I drove down, brought homemade pesto, and spent the afternoon playing cornhole on the same lawn where years earlier I'd raked leaves while Dad complained about property taxes. Laughter rose against the clap of beanbags hitting boards. The house looked smaller than my memories, yet more alive. Near dusk, I walked to my car and noticed the neighbor across the street. Mrs. Cantrell, who once delivered casseroles to Mom, watching curiously. She waved, approached, and spoke kindly. "Your parents live across town now. They don't come by much." I thanked her, not sure what else to say. Driving away, I realized the landscape of my past could exist without requiring my occupation. I could visit, contribute leave. Freedom in practice. Summer rolled in bright and dry. My kayak carried me across mirror-still mornings while ospreys hunted overhead. Therapy sessions pivoted from triage to growth, discussing future goals. Maybe buying a place in Portland, maybe mentoring foster youth. One evening, scrolling news, I found an article titled, "From Failure to Founder, The Redemption of Mason Reed." He'd launched a podcast about overcoming setbacks, framing his fraud as an unfortunate misunderstanding blown out of proportion by jealous parties. My name never appeared, but context made it clear who the villain was. I felt the old spark of anger, then extinguished it. People curate narratives. Truth's job is not to chase every lie, only to stand unbent. In September, I received an invitation to Mason's wedding he'd proposed to a fellow podcaster ceremony in Arizona Registry. Included noise-canceling headphones and a crowd-funded honeymoon. I declined, sent nothing, and felt no guilt. October brought another letter from Dad, this one typed, grammar checked. He detailed lifestyle changes, a new part-time mentoring gig at the vocational school, and closed with, "I don't expect reconciliation to be easy, but I'm willing to earn it if you'll let me try." I held the pages, heart careful. Healing. I'd learned isn't linear. It spirals forward, back, pause, leap. I wrote a concise reply. "I appreciate the effort. Let's start with occasional emails. No financial talk, just people." It was enough for now. December in Portland means rain-stitched with fairy-light reflections. I hosted friends for a potluck, people from pottery class coworkers, 2 residents from the Briarwood home now attending college nearby. We crowded my kitchen, passing dishes, sharing stories about first jobs and worst dates. At midnight, someone proposed a toast to chosen families and fresh chapters. Glasses clinked, warmth spread. After the last guest left, I stepped onto the balcony, drizzle, cool on my cheeks, city humming below. I thought of younger me, counting heartbeats at Thanksgiving of mashed potatoes, and whispered insults of forged signatures and shredded letters. I let those images drift, then watched them dissolve into the shimmer of streetlights on wet pavement. Life, it turns out, doesn't hand you closure. You write it yourself, sentence by relentless sentence, until the story finally sounds like you. A new year always feels like a blank check. But by late January, I'd learned unspent potential can sour just like forgotten milk. So I filled the early weeks with concrete plans, doubling the nonprofit's grant budget, scouting a second property near Salem for another transition house, and scheduling bi-weekly video calls with Dad, strictly 30 minutes. No money talk, just 2 men stepping awkwardly around decades of silence until we discovered an unexpected overlap in woodworking videos. He'd downsized into a duplex with a modest shed out back, now lined with hand tools instead of the roar of industrial saws. And every call, he lifted some half-finished project birdhouses, cutting boards, a delicately curved chair arm, like a kid at show and tell. I surprised myself by feeling proud. Not because the pieces were flawless, they weren't, but because each plane mark echoed effort instead of entitlement. Mom never appeared on camera, and Dad never explained whether that was her choice or his suggestion. I let the question float unanswered. Work accelerated our new storytelling dashboard, beat quarterly adoption targets by 40%, and the board approved my proposal to spin the tech into a social impact tier for nonprofits. On launch day, I walked out of the office to find coworkers taping balloons to my civic gray Corolla and singing off-key. and for the span of that goofy chorus, my chest felt roomy enough to sail hot air balloons through. That weekend, I drove the kayak to the coast, skimming low waves at sunrise, sensing in the brush of salt air against my face how distance had stretched my life big again. Monday morning, the other shoe clattered an email titled, "Courtesy Confirmation, Reed Hayes Wedding Payment Plan." Mason had listed me as guarantor on a luxury venue contract requiring a 35% deposit within 72 hours. The coordinator's pleasant note assumed my eager participation. I breathed once deep, then forwarded the message to Marisol with the subject line, "Guess who's back?" She filed an immediate cease and desist, and I texted Mason 2 words, "Remove me," before blocking his number again. 48 hours later, the venue manager called to ask if I wanted to transfer the date to another party. Apparently, the happy couple had vanished without payment. News trickled through shared acquaintances. Mason's fiancée discovered discrepancies in his podcast sponsorship claims. Investors pulled out, engagement imploded. Part of me wanted to soften to imagine Mason finally facing his own wreckage. But memory snapped like a guardrail. Boundaries held. February rain blurred into March algae green, and Dad emailed that he'd volunteered to teach intro carpentry at the vocational school on Saturday mornings. He attached a photo of 12 students' sleeves, rolled eyes bright, behind safety goggles. I printed it, pinned it beside my desk, and noticed something loosening inside me, space where forgiveness might germinate, though still fenced off from the scorched fields of the past. That same week, the Salem property hit the market at a foreclosure price I could manage. Inspection revealed termite damage, but my nonprofit director argued we could restore it with volunteer labor and still come in under budget. I signed the offer, feeling the click of another gear sliding into collective motion. While contractors demolished walls in Salem, Dad shipped me a slim maple box he'd made with hand-cut dovetails. Inside, a letter confronting his complicity during my childhood, acknowledging every unpaid thank you, every turned shoulder. He wrote that after the heart scare, he realized silence wasn't neutrality. It was endorsement, and he asked, not demanded, for a chance to keep showing up differently. I sat in my apartment, fingertips grazing the crisp bevel of the lid, and let tears trace new paths. I drafted a reply that evening, warning him progress wouldn't convince me to bankroll Mom's next crisis, but also inviting him to Portland for a weekend woodworking workshop my company hosted for local teens. He accepted within 10 minutes, adding a smiley he'd never used before. April's first week, Dad arrived by Amtrak, thinner, slower, but carrying a satchel of chisels wrapped in flannel. We spent Saturday in the company makerspace, guiding teenagers through the ritual of turning rough pine into something intentional. Sawdust clouded the air, and every time Dad knelt to correct a grip or praise a clean edge, I saw a man relearning fatherhood in real time. Sunday morning, over diner pancakes, he admitted Mom blamed me for Mason's downfall and refused to discuss reconciliation. The words lodged like cold stones in my throat, but I chewed, swallowed, and told him he didn't have to mediate a war, he just had to choose his own peace. He nodded, weary, yet lighter, and boarded the train home. 2 weeks later, my nonprofit secured a state grant to replicate the transitional home model region-wide. Celebration was still echoing when Marisol called with a sharper update. Mason had violated probation by failing to disclose a sponsored crypto scheme and now faced a potential custodial sentence. The prosecutor wanted my statement about financial impact optional, given restitution had been paid but influential. I booked a therapy appointment before deciding. Ethics unspooled on the office couch. Did withholding testimony reward manipulation? Or did pushing for jail time perpetuate a system already skilled at crushing people? In the end, I offered a balanced letter detailing harm, acknowledging restitution, requesting rehabilitation over incarceration, contingent on documented compliance. The prosecutor thanked me. The judge issued 90 additional days of probation, mandatory employment verification, social media monitoring. Mason's podcast went dark. Early May, I drove to Salem for a site visit. The house, stripped to studs, smelled of exposed timber and possibility. Volunteers painted the new framing with messages, "You belong here. Tomorrow starts now." Before drywall would hide them like secret encouragement. Standing in that husk, I pictured my younger self straining to be useful, invisible, valuable. I whispered to the empty rooms that no one here would have to earn safety. June unfolded warm and fast conference talks, late-night bug fixes, neighborhood barbecues, first tomato harvest at Briarwood. Dad sent photos of his students' final projects, a bookshelf, a porch swing, and noted Mom had looked through the album without comment. Then, on a Friday close to solstice, my office receptionist buzzed, "Your mother is here." Shock pinned me to my chair. I found her in the lobby, clasping her purse like a lifeline. Lines etched deeper around her eyes. Pride and panic jostled across her features. We stepped into a meeting room. She spoke first words rehearsed until brittle Mason's situation had drained her. She feared losing Dad's fragile progress. She didn't expect money-only conversation. I listened, arms folded, heartbeat steady. When she paused, I asked what she was sorry for, specifics not general fog. She faltered, started again this time, naming the Thanksgiving remark. The gossip campaign, the forged loan she'd rationalized as business. Her voice cracked on the word burden. I let silence answer because apologies require room to echo. Finally, I said I could accept remorse, but trust would need rebuilding in slow, measurable steps. First, counseling together with a licensed mediator, no financial ties. She agreed, tears slipping uncontrolled at the clarity of the boundary. We set a date. She left shoulders slightly lifted, as if an unseen weight had shifted. That night, I paddled the Columbia under a sky still lit at nearly 10 each stroke, scattering gold reflections. I realized forgiveness, like rowing, moved forward while facing the past. You pull against the wake, yet glide towards something new. July scorched with uncharacteristic heat. Wildfire smoke drifted north, sunsets bruised purple. Mediation sessions began over video. A calm therapist guided Mom and me through decades-old debris, spotlighting her unexamined fear of scarcity that had mutated into control. She wept, describing how Grandpa's early layoffs haunted her, how Mason's shine felt like insurance against obscurity, how my quiet stability became an excuse to overlook me. I recognized echoes of my own distortions, how proving worth through payments had let me avoid messy confrontation. Progress staggered, but moved. On the nonprofit front, Salem House neared completion. I invited Dad to help install kitchen cabinets alongside residents-to-be, and on opening day, he shook hands with a girl who reminded me of Riley's youngest vowing to teach her dovetail joints. As speeches closed, Mom stood at the curb, invited but uncertain. I walked over, handed her a paintbrush, asked if she wanted to help freshen the picket fence. She nodded. And for an hour, we worked side by side, conversation light, paint strokes steady. Late summer delivered the last twist. A national logistics firm offered to acquire my startup platform, valuing it at 7 figures with a clause dedicating 10% of profits to the transition home network. The offer promised impact beyond my loan capacity, yet handing over my creation felt like releasing a kite to strangers. I consulted Dad, who surprised me with quiet insight. "A tool works best in the hands that swing it widest," he said, referencing a proverb his own father muttered while sharpening blades. I accepted the deal, structured a governance seat for myself, and earmarked personal proceeds to endow a scholarship for vocational students emerging from foster care, woodworking, or coding, whichever craft built them. September cooled, smoke cleared, and Mason contacted Dad, requesting a supervised call with me to apologize formally. Therapy had taught me choice, not reflex, so I mulled it during a dawn kayak drift, water glassy horizon pale rose. I decided yes. Under conditions recorded, mediator present, no financial ask, accountability first. The call lasted 20 minutes. Mason's voice carried none of its old gloss, only gravel. He admitted forging documents, admitted enjoying the family pedestal, admitted that every crash since had a mirror with his own reflection. He hoped one day I'd attend his woodworking class in the prison education program he'd joined as a volunteer to shave probation hours. I felt sorrow, not pity, told him growth is measured in miles, not minutes, and wished him perseverance. Autumn tipped leaves into fiery confession. The second home welcomed residents. The first house celebrated a graduate's full-time job offer. Dad's cholesterol improved. Mom joined an accountability group. I spent evenings on my balcony city lights flickering like Morse code and realized the narrative arc I once thought must end in either reunion or rupture had evolved into something subtler, a mosaic of cautious reconnections, firm boundaries, and ripples of kindness spreading far beyond the first stone. One night, I reread Grandpa's note that came with the cabin deed. Use this place to remember who you want to be, and understood why legacy isn't what you inherit, but what you renovate. The past would always exist. Hardwood grain scarred by careless nails, yet sanded, sealed, and handed to the next pair of determined hands. It could still hold weight without splitting. I closed my laptop, turned off the balcony light, and let the cool breeze carry tomorrow in. October dawned clear and sharp, the kind of sky that makes even city steel look polished, and I woke before the alarm, restless with a sense that something unseen had shifted overnight. At the office, my calendar showed an emergency board meeting. Acquisition paperwork was nearly final, so I assumed last-minute legal tweaks. Instead, the new parent company's council announced they were reevaluating non-core obligations code for slashing the 10% profit stream promised to the transition houses. My jaw tightened while a dozen suits discussed synergy as if lives weren't threaded through that clause. When they finally invited comment, I kept my tone measured, explained that goodwill wasn't decor but infrastructure, produced metrics showing lower staff turnover, and higher client retention linked directly to our social impact branding. The chair thanked me, tabled the vote, and adjourned. I walked out vibrating with fury wrapped in ice. That night, I drafted 2 contingency plans. First, a public relations campaign highlighting stories from our residents. Second, a legal strategy Marisol could weaponize if the company breached contract. Then I called Dad. He listened, hummed like he does when sanding hardwood, and said, "Remember, a dovetail holds because each side locks the other. They need you too." The image settled me. I spent the next week gathering data, editing video testimonials, and rehearsing a presentation that braided profit with purpose, so tightly no blade could separate them without ruining both. Meanwhile, Mom sent a text after our latest counseling session. "Proud of how you stand up for people. Wish I had learned sooner." I stared at those words, letting their warmth soak through disbelief. On presentation day, the boardroom smelled of espresso and caution. I spoke for 18 minutes. No slides until the end, just narrative, a girl named Sky who'd arrived at Briarwood with a garbage bag of clothes and now ran the garden program. A young man, Theo, who built a window seat at the Salem house and decided to study carpentry because he felt peace each time cedar shavings curled away beneath the plane. Then I clicked the final slide, a spreadsheet that translated those stories into hard numbers. Improved brand sentiment. New contracts from clients who cited our mission turnover savings equal to triple the donation percentage. Silence held thick as sap until one director cleared his throat and said, "I didn't realize it was that direct." Vote called, clause preserved. I exhaled so deeply my ribs ached. November arrived wearing fog like a shawl, and I traveled to Briarwood for the annual harvest dinner the residents insisted on hosting. Dad rode shotgun toolbox at his feet in case anything needed fixing. Mom followed in her own car boundaries, honored. The house glowed with pumpkin-colored lanterns. Sky greeted us at the door, cheeks flushed with authority. Inside, laughter pinballed off walls, once heavy with secrets. Mom drifted room to room, touching things she'd never noticed when she lived there. Hand-painted tiles, photos of graduating residents, a framed quote, "You are more than survival." During dessert, Theo found Dad examining the window seat and asked if mortise and tenon joints were really stronger than brackets. Dad lit up, and the two disappeared with tape measures, returning later coated in sawdust faces bright. The moment felt like time bending to mend itself. Afterward, Mom asked if she could walk the garden with me alone. We paced between kale rows glistening with dew, and she told me counseling had peeled back her fear of scarcity. She was learning that love measured in dollars decays, while love measured in presence multiplies. I said I hoped her presence included Dad's new softness, not Mason's old sparkle. She nodded, tears catching chill air. Winter pressed in, early, heavy rains drumming rooftops, and the Salem house prepared for its first holiday season. Volunteers strung thrift store lights while residents experimented with ginger spice cookies that spread into abstract continents. I I arrived with Dad to install a reclaimed oak dining table. He guided Theo through each dowel insertion like a surgeon. After the final sanding, we all ate misshapen cookies, and Theo asked if my scholarship covered trade school. I handed him the brochure. His grin split the room's gray light. Driving back, Dad said he never imagined feeling useful without being perfect. Teaching had shown him that skill shared beats skill hoarded. At a red light, he added, "I'm sorry I taught you usefulness was the only way to earn space. I gripped the steering wheel throat tight and managed thank you for unteaching it." December's corporate holiday gala glittered in a downtown ballroom. I wore a charcoal suit, nodded through small talk, then cornered the CFO to propose expanding the social impact tier internationally. She surprised me by agreeing to pilot a program in Vancouver. Progress I'd learned often hid inside rooms you dreaded entering. On the terrace afterward, I answered a call from the prison education coordinator. Mason's class had produced 15 cedar toy boxes for a charity drive, and he'd asked if I could arrange delivery to the transition houses. The thought of those boxes traveling from his workshop to my residence felt like two broken roads joining. I said yes with the condition the boxes carry no signatures, just the date and the phrase, "Keep building." He agreed. The truck arrived 3 days before Christmas. Residents unloaded crates smelling of fresh wood and placed them beneath the common room tree. No one asked who built them. They only admired the craftsmanship and filled each with donated gloves and notebooks. Watching, I felt a stitch in the fabric of our family tighten, subtle, but real. New Year's Eve at the cabin was tradition revived. Riley, her kids' mom, dad, and a handful of friends gathered around a bonfire, cracking so loudly it drowned the river's hush. We wrote fears on scraps of paper and fed them to flames. Mine read mistaking productivity for worth. Midnight fireworks flickered miles away, distant but bright. Dad lifted a mug of cocoa toward me. Mom mirrored him, tentative but sincere. I toasted back the spark inside, matching the sky's brief bloom. January tax season brought spreadsheets thick as bark, and I discovered the nonprofit's rapid growth had outpaced its governance framework. Fraud prevention training flagged minor irregularities. Nothing malicious, just sloppy record-keeping that could erode trust. Old instincts nudged me to fix everything alone, yet leadership means releasing the wrench sometimes. I hired an external auditor, invited residents to join the oversight committee, and circulated a memo titled Shared Stewardship. Transparency like fresh air stung but healed. By March, the auditor's praise for our corrective action became a selling point in a grant that funded a third property near Eugene. Expansion felt different now, less like escape, more like branching. Spring also delivered the Vancouver pilot. I spent alternate weeks on trains mapping community logistics gaps while finding comfort in the hum of rails. One drizzly evening, I stepped into a modest community center to pitch our model. During Q+A, a soft-spoken First Nations elder asked how we would honor local customs of kinship rather than impose Southern templates. The question pierced my chest with its gentleness. I replied that our only template was listening first and offered governance seats to Indigenous youth advocates. The elder's nod felt like a sunbeam cutting cloud. Back in Portland, the board surprised me by electing me Chief Impact Officer role, focused solely on weaving profit with purpose. Imposter syndrome poked its head, but memories of boardrooms, gardens, and cedar toy boxes fused into quiet conviction. I accepted negotiated caretaker stipends for every house and scheduled quarterly mental health retreats for staff and residents alike. Early summer, I visited the prison workshop. Security gates clanged behind me, echoing like old ghosts. Yet inside wood dust danced in window shafts like hope refusing stillness. Mason stood at a bench guiding an inmate through dovetail alignment. He looked up, eyes cautious. I greeted him, complimented the precision of a blanket chest nearby. He thanked me, voice steady, then asked if the boxes reached their destination. I told him how the residents filled each with gifts, how one teen kept his winter journal inside and called it a treasure chest. Mason's shoulders dropped, relief exhaling. He didn't request credit, didn't pivot to personal woes. Instead, he asked about the Vancouver project, genuinely curious. 10 minutes later, a guard signaled time. Mason extended a hand smeared with glue. I shook it surprised at the absence of bitterness in my grip. Outside sunlight felt wider. July heat returned, but wildfire smoke stayed away merciful. The Eugene house opened with a ribbon cut by residents themselves. Dad crafted the sign Mom planted rosemary by the front step. Riley's kids painted a mural of mountains and rivers across the sidewall. Journalists covered the event, calling it a model of community self-rehabilitation. I gave one interview, then slipped away to the backyard, where laughter rose over a volleyball net. I watched a former foster kid spike the ball, then tumble laughing into grass freedom visible in the arc of his body. August marked 2 years since I'd driven north. I celebrated by kayaking pre-dawn, slicing water black as ink, until sunrise poured molten gold across the surface. Mid-paddle, an idea surfaced a traveling workshop that taught woodworking and coding at rural high schools staffed by graduates of our houses. I took it to the board, secured a seed fund, and emailed Mason an invitation to apply as instructor after probation ends. 24 hours later, he replied with a single line, "I'll be ready." Mom continued therapy, occasionally stumbling into old habits, but catching herself faster. On a Sunday video call, she mentioned joining a quilting circle that makes comforters for shelters. She was learning the tiny, consistent stitches matter more than grand designs lesson familiar to both of us. Dad, now semi-retired from teaching, restored the cabin dock, replacing rotten boards with cedar salvaged from the prison workshop. Cycles closing, cycles beginning. Autumn again leaves rust whisper over pavement. I stand on the porch of the Briarwood house, watching dusk soften edges, remembering the night I walked away loaded with hurt. Not knowing absence was the first swing of a hammer, reshaping everything. Inside, residents set the long table, Dad built voices overlapping in plans for winter goals, driver's licenses, GEDs, apartment searches. I step in to help pour water unnoticed for a moment, and realize I'm finally okay with being part of the background, because in this light, every face is equally bright. Dinner begins, stories spill laughter, buoys the ceiling. My phone buzzes a notification that our Vancouver pilot met its first milestone 3 months early, and I silence it. Work can wait, living can't. I lift my glass, catch Mom's eye across the table, where she sits beside Sky comparing pie recipes, and for the first time the word family feels roomy enough for us all. Winter crept back with a muted hush, city skylines ghosted by mist riverbanks, skeletal yet resolute, and somewhere in that pared-back landscape, I sensed the story's final movement, beginning not an abrupt finale, more a long-held note, resolving into silence. My days braided board meetings with sawdust mornings, drafting expansion blueprints, afternoons in the makerspace assembling prototypes for the traveling workshop we'd christened Roadcraft. Evenings, I walked the park path along the Willamette, the air sharp with pine mind, sifting through past and present, like fingers over smooth pebbles. January's first Monday brought the last document in the acquisition saga profit share, percentages cemented social impact commitments. Codified in language Marisol called lawsuit-proof, I skimmed, signed, and felt an unexpected calm. The fight had reshaped into structure conflict, hammered into architecture that would outlast my career. Corporate victory tasted quieter than imagined, more like cool water than champagne, but it refreshed all the same. A week later, Roadcraft's inaugural route launched a refurbished bus, hauling portable lathes and laptops instructors drawn from our houses and the prison program. I rode the first leg south to Coos Bay, nerves buzzing, until the doors folded open, and a dozen high schoolers filed aboard curiosity, overtaking skepticism once the cedar scent hit them. Mason, on supervised work release, demonstrated dovetails beside Theo, now a paid teaching apprentice. Their synchronized motions said more about redemption than any speech. During lunch break, I caught Mason alone, eyes on the Pacific. He said, "Every cut reminds me someone's going to check my angles," now half-smile self-aware. I answered, "Accountability's a straight edge, you can lean on it," and for once, no defense flickered behind his gaze. Progress, I'd learned, is often a reshaping of muscle memory rather than a revelation. February thawed early. Crocuses speared sidewalks like tiny declarations. Dad visited Portland to co-lead a roadcraft class for veterans. Afterward, sipping black tea in my kitchen, he handed me a leather-bound journal filled with designs for adaptive woodworking tools he and his students had sketched. "Think the network could use these?" I thumbed pages alive with earnest diagrams and said yes, already envisioning grants. Mom mailed a box of quilts, her circle-stitched, bright geometrics backed with flannel. No note inside. The fabric spoke for her pattern after patient pattern. We distributed them at Salem and Eugene. Residents wrapped the weight around shoulders, still learning to trust warmth that doesn't come with conditions. March pushed clouds aside for sudden sun. The Vancouver pilot, strengthened by Indigenous governance, secured municipal funding to create a permanent logistics hub, employing alumni from tribal foster programs. I flew up for the signing ceremony. The elder from our first meeting clasped my hand and said, "Good partnerships feel like rivers, steady, not forced." Later, I walked the seawall alone, gulls wheeling overhead, and let his words ripple. That night on the train south, I opened Grandpa's dock renovator manual margins, now annotated by Dad, and penciled a new note, legacy equals momentum with memory. Tax season again, yet this time the numbers felt like narrative milestones rather than pitfalls, Grant's balanced audits. Pristine residents graduating into apartments at triple last year's rate. Riley sent a celebratory voice message. "You turned a drama into infrastructure, cuz?" I laughed aloud in my office, thought how her kids once painted that mountain mural and were now teenagers, sending volunteers our way for school credit. April's mediation session with Mom unfolded without the friction I'd braced for. She spoke of triggers, how seeing invoices still sparked panic, until she practiced pausing instead of pressing, and shared that she'd visited a financial literacy workshop at the Salem House to understand budgets without fear. The therapist asked what trust looked like going forward. I answered predictability and honest curiosity. Mom nodded, tears absent this time, determination steadier than regret. We scheduled our first shared volunteer shift for June, prepping garden beds together at Briarwood. Small steps tilled soil. May delivered wandering breezes and unexpectedly companionship. I met Tahlia at a nonprofit conference, an urban planner with a laugh that bent conversations toward possibility. We toured food cart pods, traded childhood stories in the glow of string lights. And by month's end, she'd joined weekend paddle sessions, our kayaks gliding side by side, as if synced by centuries-old tide charts. I told her the condensed version of my family saga. She listened without flinching or cataloging, simply asked what healing looked like now. I realized the answer was being able to tell the story without tasting iron. Summer's crescendo began with Roadcraft's first anniversary festival, held on the cabin grounds, now upgraded with solar panels and a broad deck that doubled as a stage. Residents manned booths selling wooden spoons, code-stitched LED badges, and herb starts from the Briarwood beds. Dad demonstrated live joinery. Mom served lemonade, laughing with Riley over mismatching aprons. Mason, probation completed, arrived with prison program alumni, each wearing a shirt reading, "Keep Building." He approached me carrying a carved canoe paddle, a gift for my kayak handle, inlaid with a slender cedar feather. The symbolism hit deep. I gripped the paddle, said, "Thank you," and felt somewhere between siblings a bridge settle into place. Not ornate, but serviceable, strong. Late July heat shimmered off sidewalks. Contract finalizations for the Eugene expansion demanded my attention. Yet each night, I found time to meet Tahlia for city wanders. One twilight, she traced a finger over the paddle's feather inlay and mused direction and lift in one line, and I wondered how she saw through surfaces so quickly. When she suggested mapping future roadcraft stops to underserved coastal hamlets, I said yes before remembering the logistics spreadsheet, then realized eagerness no longer equaled obligation, but genuine alignment. August brought the Eugene House's first graduate, Layla, who landed a union carpentry apprenticeship, and at commencement spoke of transforming walls that once imprisoned into frames that now welcomed. Dad caught my eye, pride pooling. Mom hugged Layla's mother. Their quiet exchange proved empathy can circulate without translation. That night, the graduating cohort danced under string lights amid sawdust and garden perfume. I stepped back, letting scenes unfold, unsupervised leadership rewritten as absence where growth belongs. September's equinox tipped daylight toward brevity, but momentum held. Corporate quarterly reports revealed the social impact tier driving new markets. The board approved an endowment guaranteeing core funding regardless of future leadership. Marisol forwarded the signed resolution with a smiley I rarely saw from her. I closed the email, leaned back, and exhaled, understanding at last the difference between security hoarded and security shared. Meanwhile, Roadcraft scheduled its first interstate trek into Idaho reservations. Mason would co-lead, supervised by Theo, now project manager, a rotation impossible to imagine 3 years prior. Dad celebrated 60. We gathered at the cabin Mom Riley's brood residents, past and present, even a few board members who swapped ties for flannel. Dad unveiled a canoe he'd built from reclaimed cedar strips. He named it Turning Point Letters burned deep along the bow. He asked if I'd christen it. I dipped the paddle Mason gifted me into lake water, flicked droplets across the hull, and said, "May she carry every traveler farther than they thought possible." Applause rustled pine needles. Later, under constellations, Dad and I paddled the lake's mirror surface strokes, silent stars unbroken. He said, voice hushed, "I used to think legacy was what you leave behind. I'm learning it's the distance you're still willing to go." I answered, "And who you invite along?" Autumn waned. Roadcraft returned from Idaho, bearing new stories, a high schooler who coded irrigation sensors for her grandmother's farm, a veteran teaching children to plane boards while recounting how wood grain teaches patience. Press coverage followed, donations spiked, but I kept my eyes on the quieter metrics, relapse rates. Nights spent housed hands, rising in classrooms. Numbers whispered, "We're bending the line." December's chill sharpened. Talia and I hosted a solstice potluck at my apartment, turned luminous with candles and cedar garlands. Mom arrived early with spiced cider, nervous in the mingling of old and new circles, yet laughter soon braided across differences. Dad presented wooden ornaments, shaped like tiny buses, each etched with a place Roadcraft had reached. One by one, guests hung them on a string above the windows, forming a timeline of motion. Near midnight, Mason slipped in from the final workshop shift, clothes dusted eyes, tired yet clear. He toasted to second chances, voice steady, and nobody averted eyes. The past no longer dominated the room. It simply underpinned the floor we all stood on. In that mellow hush before the new year, I stepped onto the balcony, cold air needling my lungs, city lights shimmering across the river. I thought of the boy who once mashed potatoes in silence, of the man who canceled autopay and drove into an uncertain night, of the houses now humming with found family. Trauma had not vanished. It had been composted memory, broken down into nutrients feeding something sturdier. I felt the weight of the cedar paddle in my hand, traced the feather motif, and understood that lift isn't the absence of gravity, but partnership with it, pushing water backward so the vessel moves forward. Behind me, voices rose in countdown. Ahead lay a horizon obscured by mist, but no longer by fear. I inhaled, savoring the blend of smoke, cider, and pine, then stepped inside to join the chorus, ready for the next stroke.